Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
Sometime in 2018, I was shopping with my mother at the JCPenney in my town when I first saw the black figure. The store had a basement, or at least a lower level that felt separate from the rest of the building. Everything seemed normal while we were upstairs. People were shopping, employees were working, and there was nothing about the place that made me feel nervous. That changed as soon as we went downstairs. The moment I entered the lower level, the air felt heavy. I do not mean that it was simply warmer or more humid. It felt as though the atmosphere itself had changed. Breathing seemed slightly more difficult, and I immediately became uncomfortable. It was the kind of feeling that makes you believe someone is watching you before you have any reason to think that. I looked toward the back corner of the lower level. A black humanoid figure was standing there. It had the general outline of a person, but I could not see a face, clothing, or any clear features. It looked darker than the shadows around it. The figure was facing me. I had the unmistakable feeling that it was staring me down. For a moment, I stood there looking toward it, trying to understand what I was seeing. It could have been a mannequin. Department stores are full of human-shaped displays, and in poor lighting, they can look unsettling. It could also have been a rack of dark clothing, a pillar, or a shadow created by the way the lights fell across the corner. I told myself it was my eyes playing tricks on me. I looked away and tried to ignore it. My mother did not react as though she had seen anything. Other shoppers continued moving around normally. If a strange person had been standing in the corner watching us, someone else should have noticed. That helped me dismiss it. I stayed near my mother and continued shopping. Sometime later, I was looking through clothes by myself. I had mostly forgotten about the shape in the corner. I was focused on whatever was hanging on the rack in front of me. Then I looked up. The black figure was there again. This time, it appeared much closer. I saw it for only a second. It was present long enough for me to recognize the same human-like outline, but before I could study it, it was gone. I do not remember it walking away. It did not move behind a clothing rack or turn a corner. I looked up, saw it, and then there was nothing there. That brief second frightened me more than the first sighting. The shape in the back corner could have been a display or shadow. Seeing it again in a different location made that explanation feel less certain. I ran back to my mother. I did not leave the store or make a scene. We simply stayed together and continued shopping. I may not have told her exactly what I had seen at the time. Even if I did, there was no reason for her to believe something strange was following me through the lower level. Nothing else happened before we left. Once we were outside the store, the heavy feeling disappeared. I could have treated the whole experience as a strange moment caused by lighting, tiredness, or anxiety. That would have been the end of it. But later in 2018, I saw the same figure inside my house. I was sitting on the couch one day. The back of the couch faced the hallway, so when I turned my head, I could see part of it behind me. I looked back and saw the black figure running through the hall. It moved quickly. I did not have time to see details, but the shape immediately reminded me of what I had seen in the department store basement. It had the same dark human outline. Then it disappeared from view. At the time, I did not think about it as seriously as I probably should have. A person can catch movement in their peripheral vision and mistake it for something else. A family member may have passed through the hallway. A shadow from outside could have moved across the wall. Even something as simple as hair shifting near the edge of someone's vision can look like a dark figure for a moment. I told myself it was nothing. But the sightings continued. Sometimes I saw the figure in the hallway. It would appear near a doorway or at the far end of the passage, standing still. Other times, I saw it in my parents' bedroom. It did not always run. Often, it simply stood there. I could never see a face. There were no eyes reflecting light and no visible mouth. I could not identify clothes or hair. It was just the outline of a person made from darkness. The figure usually appeared briefly. I might look toward a room and see it standing inside, then look again and find the space empty. Sometimes it vanished when I focused directly on it. Other times, it remained long enough for me to become frightened before disappearing. I began wondering whether the thing from the store had somehow followed me home. That idea seemed ridiculous. I had not touched anything unusual or brought home a strange object from the basement. There was no clear reason a figure in a department store would become connected to me. But the resemblance felt too strong to ignore. Before the shopping trip, I did not remember regularly seeing a black humanoid shape around the house. Afterward, it began appearing again and again. The experiences became more intense in December 2018. By then, I had started seeing the figure more often in my parents' room and in the hallway. It seemed comfortable, standing in places where someone might normally wait or watch. It did not need to move toward me. Just seeing it there was enough to make me feel that it knew I could notice it. One night, I saw it near the Christmas tree. The tree was decorated and standing in the house like it did every December. The lights and ornaments should have made that part of the room feel warm and familiar. Instead, the dark figure stood nearby. The contrast made it even more disturbing. The Christmas lights created enough illumination that I should have been able to see what was there. But the figure remained completely black. It did not become clearer in the light. I could not make out fabric, skin, or any normal feature. It looked like an empty human shape beside the tree. I ran to my bedroom. I closed myself inside and stayed there. For roughly 45 minutes, I did not see it. I hoped it had disappeared or remained in the other room. Then, I looked toward my doorway. The figure was standing in the doorframe. It had moved from the Christmas tree to my room. I do not know whether it had followed me immediately and waited outside or appeared there later. I only know that after I had hidden in my room for nearly an hour, it was suddenly framed in the doorway. That was one of the worst sightings. A shape in a distant hallway can be blamed on poor vision. A dark form in another room may be furniture. But the doorway gave it a clear outline. The figure stood where a person would stand. It seemed to fill the space without showing any detail. I was terrified. The figure continued appearing throughout the night. I cannot remember every place or exact moment. It would be there, disappear, and return somewhere else. I began expecting to see it whenever I looked toward the door. The night felt endless because I could not relax. Even when the figure was gone, I believed it might be standing just outside my view. I do not remember it speaking. It never called my name. It did not touch me or throw objects. It did not make a direct threat. The fear came from its presence and persistence. It seemed determined to remain near me. By morning, the activity stopped or became less noticeable. The house looked normal again in daylight. The Christmas tree was only a Christmas tree. My doorway was empty. Nothing had been damaged, and no one else reported seeing a person moving through the house. That made it difficult to prove that anything had happened. The figure continued appearing after that. One of the most specific incidents happened on May 16th, 2019. I remember the date because I had a band performance and was getting ready for it. My dogs started barking. Dogs bark for many reasons. They hear sounds people cannot hear clearly, notice movement outside, or react to someone approaching the house. Still, their barking got my attention. I needed to get my makeup, so I walked near the bathroom. From that area, I could see the door leading to the garage. The garage door was open. There was no obvious reason for it to be open. I had not opened it, and as far as I knew, no one had just come through. Near the open door stood the black figure. Again, it had the same human shape and complete lack of features. It was positioned close to the entrance, as though it had either come in from the garage or was preparing to leave through it. The dogs had been barking, the door had opened without explanation, and the figure was nearby. Those details made the sighting feel more physical than the earlier ones. A visual hallucination could explain the figure, but it would not normally open a door. Of course, the door may already have been opened for an ordinary reason. A family member could have forgotten to close it. Air pressure may have moved a door that was not fully latched. Someone might have passed through without me knowing. The dogs could have been reacting to an animal outside rather than the figure. Several normal events may have happened at once and become connected in my mind, but in the moment, it felt like the figure had opened the garage door. I do not remember seeing it physically touch the handle. I only saw the open door and the shape near it. That distinction is important. I cannot honestly say I watched a black figure open the door. I saw the result and assumed the two were connected. My parents have never really believed me. When I told them about the figure, they said it was probably a hallucination. From their perspective, that was more reasonable than believing a dark human-like entity had followed me from a department store and begun living in our house. They did not see it. There was no photograph or video. The figure left no footprints, marks, or other evidence. Most sightings lasted only a few seconds. I understand why they were skeptical. Visual hallucinations can happen for many reasons. People can see shapes and shadows, especially when anxious, tired, or expecting something frightening. The brain naturally searches for human figures and faces. A coat hanging from a door, clothes piled on furniture, or an open doorway can become a person for a moment. This is especially common in peripheral vision, where detail is poor. Many of my sightings happened when I looked suddenly toward a hallway or room. That supports the possibility of misperception. The first figure in the store may have been a mannequin. After being frightened by it, my brain may have become sensitive to similar shapes. Once I began expecting the black figure, I may have noticed every shadow that resembled it. A dark object would appear in the corner of my vision, and my mind would immediately complete the human outline. By the time I looked directly at it, the shape would be gone, because it had never truly been a person. That could explain why the sightings began after the department store. The figure did not follow me. The memory followed me. The heavy feeling in the lower level may have started the entire pattern. Basements often feel uncomfortable because they have lower ceilings, artificial lighting, different air pressure, and fewer windows. The air may really have been stale or warm. That physical discomfort could have made me anxious. Then I saw a dark shape and interpreted it as someone watching me. The fears stayed with me after I left. Later, ordinary shadows in my home reminded me of the same figure. Over time, the image became consistent. There are also health-related explanations that should not be ignored. Stress, lack of sleep, migraines, medication, vision problems, and other conditions can cause brief visual disturbances. A person may see shapes, flashes, people, or movement that are not physically present. I do not know whether any of those factors applied to me at the time. The sightings were real to me, but that does not automatically mean an outside entity caused them. The mind can create experiences that feel completely convincing. The fact that I still see the figure occasionally makes the hallucination explanation worth taking seriously. I do not mean that I accept it completely. I only understand why my parents suggest it. The figure usually does not harm me. It appears, stands somewhere, moves through a hallway, or disappears. Because I have seen it so many times, it does not frighten me as much as it did in 2018. At first, every sighting caused immediate panic. Now I am more likely to notice it and continue with what I am doing. That does not mean I believe it is harmless. I simply became used to its presence. People can adapt to almost anything if it happens often enough. There is also the possibility that the figure is connected to the house rather than the store. Maybe I only became aware of it after the basement experience. It could have been present before, moving through the hallway without being noticed. Once I saw a similar shape at JCPenney, I became capable of recognizing it at home. That explanation still assumes something paranormal exists, but it does not require the figure to have followed me from the store. Perhaps two unrelated experiences became linked because the forms looked similar. The figure might also represent more than one thing. Every black shape I have seen may not be the same entity. A shadow in the store, movement behind the couch, a shape near the Christmas tree, and something by the garage door could all have different causes. My mind may have combined them into one continuing presence. That is a common way people create patterns. Separate incidents feel more meaningful when they become part of one story. The consistency of the appearance is what makes me hesitate. The figure is always black, always human-shaped, always without a face. It does not appear as different people or random objects. It feels like the same thing. I have sometimes wondered whether it is a shadow person. Many people describe seeing dark, humanoid forms in homes, hallways, bedrooms, and public places. They often have no visible features and disappear quickly when noticed. Some people believe they are spirits or other entities. Others think they are sleep-related hallucinations, visual errors, or the brain's response to fear. My experiences share some of those features, but I cannot prove that the label means anything. Calling it a shadow person does not explain what it is. It only gives the shape a name. The Christmas tree incident remains one of the hardest for me to dismiss. I saw the figure near the tree, ran away, and stayed in my room for around 45 minutes. Then it appeared in my doorway. If it were only a quick visual mistake, why did the same shape return after so much time? Perhaps I was frightened enough that I expected it. The doorway was dark. Clothing, furniture, or the frame itself may have created another human outline. My brain connected the two sightings because I was still thinking about the first. The figure seemed to follow me because fear followed me. That is possible. The all-night nature of the experience may also have been influenced by exhaustion. The longer I remained awake and afraid, the more likely I was to misinterpret shadows. Every time I thought I saw it, my anxiety increased. That made the next mistake more likely. A cycle formed. Fear produced hypervigilance. Hypervigilance produced sightings. The sightings produced more fear. By morning, daylight broke the cycle. The garage incident also has ordinary explanations. The dogs may have barked because someone outside made a noise. The garage door may not have latched properly. A shadow near the doorway could have looked like the figure because I already associated dark entrances with it. The date and purpose of the day made the memory clear, but clarity does not guarantee a supernatural cause. Still, when I replay the event, the figure did not look like a normal shadow. It occupied space. It stood near the open door as though it belonged there. I felt that it was watching me. That sense of attention has been present in many of the sightings. I do not only see darkness. I feel noticed by it. Feelings are not proof. A human-shaped outline naturally creates the impression that it has awareness, even if it is only clothing or shadow. The brain is designed to detect other people quickly. It would rather mistake a coat for a person than fail to notice a real intruder. That survival mechanism may explain the entire experience. I have never seen the figure's face, because there is no face to see. The mind creates the body, but cannot supply enough detail to complete it. Or perhaps the absence of a face is part of what the figure truly is. I do not know. I sometimes wonder what would happen if I walked directly toward it instead of looking away. Would it disappear immediately? Would I reach the place where it stood and find an ordinary object? Would it remain there? I have never wanted to test that seriously. Even though it does not bother me as much now, there is still a strong instinct not to approach it. The figure has never openly attacked me, but I do not interpret that as an invitation. It watches. It appears in doorways. It moves through halls. It stands near rooms and entrances. That behavior feels deliberate. Perhaps it wants only to be noticed. Maybe it has no ability to do more. Or maybe I have misunderstood every sighting. I am careful not to say that I know it is a demon, ghost, or other supernatural being. I do not know what it is. I cannot even prove that it exists outside my perception. The hallucination explanation is possible. So is repeated misidentification. Stress, lighting, vision, and expectation could produce a convincing pattern over time. If I were hearing this story from someone else, I would suggest those possibilities too. But being the person who sees it feels different. I remember the heavy air in the store basement. I remember the black figure standing in the back corner and staring at me. I remember looking up from the clothes and seeing it again for 1 second. I remember it running through the hallway behind the couch. I remember the shape in my parents' room. I remember it beside the Christmas tree. I remember hiding for 45 minutes, only to find it standing in my doorframe. And I remember the dogs barking on May 16th, 2019, before I saw the garage door open and the same figure waiting near it. Those memories feel connected. Maybe they are not. Maybe my mind took several unrelated shadows and gave them the same identity. But the figure still appears sometimes. I have become less afraid because I know that, so far, it has never physically harmed me. That may be a dangerous assumption, but after years of sightings, constant fear becomes exhausting. I acknowledge it and move on. My parents still do not believe me. They say it is a hallucination. They may be right. I would almost prefer that explanation, because at least it belongs to something people understand. But if it is a hallucination, I do not know why it always takes the same form or why it first appeared in that heavy lower level of the store. And if it is not a hallucination, then something noticed me in the back corner of a department store basement in 2018. I saw it. I ignored it. Then, months later, it began running through the hallways of my home as though it had finally found where I lived. About a year ago, I was driving with some friends late at night when I saw something that still bothers me. It was around 10 in the evening. We were traveling down a road that was normally well lit. Most of it had streetlights spaced closely enough that you could see the sidewalks, nearby houses, and the edges of the trees. There was only one section where the lights seemed to disappear. For a short distance, the road passed through a much darker area. Trees and brush crowded close to one side, and the normal streetlights did not reach that part properly. The difference was obvious. One moment, we were driving through a bright suburban street. The next, everything outside the headlights became difficult to see. As we entered that darker section, we noticed a car stopped along the road. Its hood was open. There were around 3 men gathered at the front, all standing close together and looking into the engine. They appeared average in height and build. From a distance, the situation looked normal enough. A car had probably broken down, and several people were trying to understand what was wrong. The trunk was open, too. That seemed slightly unusual, but it was not automatically suspicious. They may have been searching for tools, jumper cables, or something stored in the back. The car's lights were on, and with both the hood and trunk open, the vehicle stood out strongly against the darkness. It was almost like a small island of light in the middle of the unlit road. The headlights illuminated the area in front. The rear lights brightened the pavement behind it. Anyone approaching would notice the car and the men immediately. At first, that was where my attention went. I watched the men near the engine as we got closer. None of them appeared to be waving for help. They were not standing in the road trying to stop traffic. They seemed focused on the open hood. Then I noticed a woman farther back. She was probably 50 to 100 feet behind the stopped car. She was walking a dog along the side of the road. It was the middle of summer, so there was nothing especially strange about that. People often walk their dogs later during hot weather because the temperature is more comfortable after sunset. She may have chosen that route many times before. She did not seem frightened or hurried. From what I could tell, she was walking normally, completely unaware of anything unusual around her. The dog did not appear to be pulling, barking, or reacting either. If that had been the whole scene, I probably would have forgotten it. A broken-down car. Several men trying to repair it. A woman taking her dog for a walk. Nothing about those things is uncommon. Then, as our car moved through the dark section, I looked toward the trees. A man was standing there. He was only a few feet ahead of the woman. He was pressed so closely against the trunk of a tree that I nearly missed him. He was not standing openly beside the road. He had positioned himself inside the darkness, using the tree to hide his body. The phrase "glued to the tree" is the best way I can describe it. He seemed to be holding himself completely still, keeping as much of his body as possible behind the trunk while watching the road. The woman was walking directly toward him. She had no idea he was there. The light from the stopped car reached enough of the street to make the woman visible. But the man remained mostly hidden in shadow. From his position, he could see her approaching. She would probably not see him until she was almost beside him. That realization hit me immediately. He was waiting for her to pass. I do not know how I knew that. He could have been standing near the tree for another reason. Maybe he was urinating, smoking, making a phone call, or waiting for someone. Perhaps he was connected to the car and had stepped away from the others. But his body language did not look casual. He was trying not to be seen. As we drove past, he turned his head. He looked directly into our car. For a second, our eyes met. That is the detail I keep returning to. It did not feel like I accidentally noticed someone standing near a tree. It felt like I caught him hiding, and he knew I had seen him. There was something in the way he looked at me that made my entire body react. I got goosebumps. I felt a sudden certainty that the woman was in danger. Our vehicle continued moving. The entire sighting lasted only a few seconds. By the time my brain fully processed what I had seen, we had already passed the woman, the hidden man, and the stopped car. I told my friends immediately. I said there had been a man hiding against a tree ahead of the woman. I explained that he appeared to be waiting for her. No one else in the car had seen him. Their attention may have been on the stopped vehicle, or the men standing around the hood. The hidden man was difficult to notice. That was probably intentional. My friends did not believe the situation was as serious as I thought. They suggested that I had mistaken a shadow, branch, or person standing normally near the trees for someone hiding. They did not want to turn around. Maybe they thought I was overreacting. Perhaps they did believe I had seen a man, but did not want to involve themselves in something that could become dangerous. There were several men near the car. Going back could have led to a confrontation. We did not know whether they had weapons. We did not know what was actually happening. At the time, continuing to drive may have felt safer than returning to investigate. But I have regretted it ever since. I do not know what happened to the woman after we left. Maybe she passed the man safely. Perhaps he was not interested in her at all. He may have remained beside the tree, and she may never have known he was there. The men around the car may have repaired it and driven away. The whole situation could have had an ordinary explanation. But part of me believes I saw the moments before someone was attacked or kidnapped. That thought has never completely left me. I imagine the woman continuing toward the dark section. The stopped car would have drawn her attention. She may have looked at the men near the hood, wondering whether they needed help or whether she should cross the road. Because she was focused on the obvious group, she would not notice the person hidden closer to her. The car's open hood and trunk could have been genuine, or they could have created a distraction. The lights made the scene visible enough to look safe while preserving deep shadows near the trees. I do not know whether the men by the car and the man near the tree were connected. At the time, I immediately felt they were. There were several people positioned along one short stretch of road. 3 men stood openly near the disabled vehicle. Another hid ahead of a woman walking alone. That arrangement felt planned, but it may only have looked that way because I was frightened. The hidden man may not have known the men at the car. He might have been another pedestrian who moved toward the trees to give the dog space. Some people are afraid of dogs. He could have stepped behind the tree because he did not want the animal to approach him. If that were the case, his stillness and the way he watched the woman might have been caution rather than predatory intent. Maybe the dog was large or aggressive looking. From the moving car, I would not have had time to understand those details. Another possibility is that he lived nearby. He may have been entering a yard through a dark path or standing at the edge of his own property. The tree could have hidden him from my angle without him deliberately using it as cover. As our car passed, he looked toward us because the headlights caught his attention. Eye contact in that situation would be completely normal. Perhaps I interpreted his position as sinister only because the setting was dark. Darkness changes how people read ordinary behavior. Someone standing under a streetlight looks like a pedestrian. The same person standing near a tree in an unlit area looks like a threat. I understand that. The stopped car may also have made me more alert. Seeing several men gathered in the dark could have placed my mind in a defensive state. Then I noticed another man, partly hidden, and immediately connected him to danger. If I had seen him during daylight, I may not have thought anything of it. Still, I cannot forget how deliberately he appeared to be concealing himself. He was not simply standing beside the tree. His body was pressed close to it. He seemed to be keeping himself inside the darkest area while watching the woman approach. And when he saw me looking, his attention shifted directly toward me. It felt like the look of someone who had been caught. That is only an interpretation. I could not see his expression clearly enough to know what he was thinking. He may have looked confused, annoyed, or frightened. The car was moving, and the encounter lasted for a second. My memory has had a year to sharpen the details. Every time I replay the moment, the man may appear more hidden and threatening than he originally did. Fear changes memory. Regret can change it too. Because I now believe I should have acted, my mind may make the danger seem more obvious than it was. If the situation had looked completely clear at the time, maybe I would have insisted that we stop. The fact that I did not may mean I was less certain then than I feel now. That possibility is uncomfortable, but important. I told my friends immediately, so I know I was concerned in the moment. But I did not call the police. I did not take a photograph. I did not write down the license plate of the stopped car. I did not ask to be dropped off somewhere safe so I could report it. I continued with my friends. Perhaps shock slowed my thinking. Perhaps I trusted their dismissal over my own instincts. When several people tell you that you probably misunderstood something, it becomes easier to doubt yourself. I may also have been afraid of looking foolish. Calling the police to report a man standing near a tree could sound ridiculous if nothing had happened. What would I say? There is a stopped car with several men near it, and another man appears to be hiding beside a woman walking her dog. I could not prove a crime was happening. The dispatcher might ask whether the man had a weapon, whether he approached her, or whether I heard her call for help. The answer to all of those questions would be no. Suspicious behavior is not always criminal behavior. Still, reporting it would have allowed someone to check. A patrol car could have driven through the area. The officer might have found a normal breakdown in a harmless pedestrian. That would have been the best outcome. Everyone would have been safe, and I would have felt foolish for a few minutes. That would be better than wondering what happened. I could also have asked my friends to circle back without stopping. We might have driven past again to see whether the woman was still walking normally. If the man had moved toward her, we could have called for help. If everyone was gone, we could have noted the vehicle. But turning around might have placed us in danger if the men were working together. They would know we had returned. The hidden man had already seen me looking directly at him. If the stopped car was part of a trap, they might have followed us. I cannot judge the decision as though we had complete information. We were reacting within seconds. Fear, uncertainty, and group pressure shaped what we did. I know that now. But guilt does not always respond to logic. I still imagine different outcomes. In one version, the woman walks past the tree, and the man grabs her. The dog barks or tries to protect her. The men at the car help force her into the open trunk. The lights go out, and the vehicle disappears before anyone else reaches that part of the road. That is the worst version my mind creates. There is no evidence it happened. It is a fear, not a memory. I never saw anyone touch the woman. I never saw her forced into the car. I did not hear screaming. I did not later read a report confirming that someone disappeared there. I have to remind myself of those facts. Imagining a crime does not mean one occurred. There are also much less frightening possibilities. The men may have been trying to fix a genuine problem. The trunk may have been open because their equipment was stored there. The hidden man may have been a friend who had walked into the trees to relieve himself. He could have been embarrassed when he realized I saw him. The woman and dog may have continued home safely. By the time we reached the next intersection, the car might have started, and everyone could have left separately. That explanation is possible, and probably more likely than a coordinated kidnapping. But the arrangement still seemed wrong. A vehicle glowing in the darkness. Several men gathered around it. A woman walking alone toward them, and another man hidden ahead of her where the light did not reach. It looked too much like a setup. I wonder whether the woman saw our car and felt safer because other people were nearby. She may have assumed the men repairing their vehicle made the road less dangerous. Most people are more comfortable when they can see others around. She could not know that one person was positioned outside the visible group. Maybe she noticed him after we passed. Perhaps the dog smelled or heard him. Dogs often detect people before their owners do. The dog may have stopped, growled, or pulled her away from the trees. She might have crossed the street. or turned around. I hoped that happened. The fact that the dog appeared calm when I saw them does not mean it remained calm. They were still some distance from the man. Once they got closer, the animal might have reacted. The woman may also have been more aware than she looked. From our car, she seemed clueless, but she might already have noticed the stopped vehicle and been watching the area carefully. Perhaps she carried a phone, alarm, or defensive spray. Maybe someone expected her home and knew her route. She may have been safer and more prepared than I assumed. I will never know. That lack of an ending is what makes the memory difficult. If I had seen the woman pass safely, the story would only be about a frightening misunderstanding. If I had witnessed an attack, I could have acted or at least reported specific information. Instead, the road disappeared behind us while the scene was still unresolved. The woman remained in danger in my mind because I never saw what came next. I have searched my memory for details that might help. What color was the car? What kind of vehicle was it? Could I remember part of the license plate? How were the men dressed? What did the hidden man look like? Was the woman young or older? What kind of dog was she walking? Most of those details are vague. I was not expecting to need them. My attention narrowed to the man near the tree and the way he looked at me. That moment pushed everything else into the background. If I had written it down that night, I might remember more. Now, after a year, I do not trust myself to provide exact descriptions. I sometimes wonder whether the man was even as close to the woman as I remember. 50 to 100 feet is only an estimate. Distances are difficult to judge from a moving car at night. He may have been farther away. He might not have been directly in her path. The tree could have stood several yards from the sidewalk. What appeared to be an ambush position may have been an unrelated spot deeper in the woods. Headlights flatten distance. Two people at different depths can look much closer together. That could change the entire meaning. His body may also have looked pressed to the tree because of the angle. Part of him was hidden by the trunk, so my brain completed the position. He may have been standing normally behind it, rather than intentionally flattening himself against it. The darkness may have removed the gap between his body and the bark. These are reasonable doubts. I repeat them whenever the guilt becomes too strong. But there was something about his eyes. Even if I misjudged everything else, I remember the instant he realized I was looking at him. He did not look toward the moving car casually. He looked at me. It felt like an exchange of understanding. I saw where he was hiding. He saw that I had noticed. Then I was gone. Perhaps that feeling came only from my own fear. Human beings are skilled at finding intention in another person's gaze. In a threatening situation, a brief glance can feel much more meaningful than it was. Still, that second remains the clearest part of the experience. I sometimes think about whether I would react differently now. I believe I would. I would call emergency services and describe the scene as suspicious, without claiming I had witnessed the crime. I would provide the location, the stopped vehicle, the group of men, and the hidden person near the pedestrian. I would let the police decide whether it required attention. I might ask the driver to turn around, but keep a safe distance. I would record the vehicle or license plate if it could be done safely. Experience makes those choices seem obvious. At the time, everything happened too quickly. I was not prepared to recognize a possible ambush. My friends did not support going back. By the time I understood how serious it felt, the opportunity had passed. I have to live with that. What I do not allow myself to do is claim the woman was definitely kidnapped or assaulted. That would turn my fear into a fact. I have no proof of her outcome. She may have reached home safely and forgotten the entire walk. The man may never have approached her. He may not have been connected to the other men at all. I hope the event was harmless. I hope my instincts were wrong. Being wrong would be the best possible answer. But the story still gives me goosebumps because it did not feel harmless when I saw it. The brightly lit car drew every eye toward the center of the road. The three men stood where anyone could see them. Behind the woman, our vehicle was passing. Ahead of her, in the only part that remained dark, a man was waiting against a tree. It was almost perfectly arranged. Visible activity in one place. An unaware person approaching. Someone hidden where she would not look. Maybe that pattern existed only in my interpretation. Or maybe I noticed exactly what I thought I noticed. I still wish I had insisted that we turn around. My friends may have complained, but we could have driven by one more time. If nothing was wrong, we would have lost only a few minutes. Instead, I have spent far longer replaying those seconds. I remember the woman walking with her dog. I remember the men around the open hood. I remember the trunk raised behind the car. Then I remember looking into the woods and finding the person no one else saw. He was so close to the tree that the darkness seemed to absorb most of him. He waited a few feet ahead of her path. And as our car passed, he turned his face and looked directly into mine. I do not know what happened after that. Maybe nothing. Maybe the woman reached her home without ever learning someone had been watching from the trees. That is what I want to believe. But there is still a part of me that thinks I witnessed the final quiet moment before something terrible happened. The road was dark. The woman kept walking. And I was the only person in our car who saw the man waiting for her. About 10 years ago, I was helping my girlfriend's parents move across the state when I saw an animal that, according to the official story, should not have been there. The move required several vehicles. I was driving the rental truck, and my girlfriend's parents were following behind us in another vehicle. Her uncle was riding with me in the cab. We had been on the road for hours. It was extremely early in the morning, probably around 3 or 4. The sky was still dark, and we were traveling through a part of the state that felt completely isolated. When I say we were in the middle of nowhere, I mean there had been almost no sign of civilization for a long time. There were no streetlights, no gas stations, no open stores, no houses with porch lights visible through the trees. We had not passed another vehicle in what felt like hours. The road ran through thick forest, curving between dark walls of trees that seemed to continue forever on both sides. The rental truck's headlights provided the only real light. Anything outside their reach disappeared into complete darkness. Driving a large moving truck on an unfamiliar rural road at that hour required constant attention. The truck was heavier and wider than the vehicle I normally drove, and every curve felt sharper because I could not see very far ahead. My girlfriend's uncle and I were both tired, but we were awake and talking from time to time. There was nothing strange about the night before the animals appeared. We were not discussing ghosts, cryptids, or local legends. We were simply trying to reach our destination without getting lost or falling asleep. Eventually, we came to a large curve in the road. The forest pressed close on both sides, and the bend prevented me from seeing what was ahead. I reduced my speed slightly as I entered it. Then, the woods seemed to explode. A huge herd of deer came running out of the trees. They crossed the road directly in front of the truck. There were so many of them that I could not count them. The headlights caught bodies, legs, and eyes moving in every direction. Some of the deer crossed from one side of the road to the other in a tight group. Others followed several feet behind. I reacted immediately and slowed the truck as much as I could without losing control. Hitting a deer in a normal car can cause serious damage. Hitting several while driving a loaded rental truck on a dark curve could have been disastrous. I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel and watched the road, trying to predict where the next deer would appear. My uncle saw them too. For several seconds, the entire road was filled with movement. It looked as though the herd was fleeing from something. Deer often cross roads together, especially in remote areas, so the sight itself was not impossible. Still, the number of animals and the urgency of their movement felt unusual. They did not seem to be wandering across slowly. They were running hard. Something had driven them out of the forest. I continued slowing until the last few deer cleared the road. Then the headlights revealed what was sitting behind them. There was a large cougar in the middle of the road. It was not a small wildcat. It was not a bobcat. It was not a house cat enlarged by darkness. It was a full-sized adult cougar. The animal was sitting or crouching in the road with a young deer held in its mouth. For a second, the scene was completely clear. The headlights illuminated the cougar's body, its long shape, and the deer hanging from its jaws. I could see enough of it to know I was not looking at a dog or a coyote. It had the proportions of a large cat. Its body was powerful and low. Its head was broad. Its coat looked like the tawny color associated with a mountain lion or cougar. Most importantly, I saw the long tail. That detail mattered because bobcats live in the area, and people often mistake them for cougars. A bobcat has a short tail. The animal in the road did not. It looked exactly like an adult cougar carrying prey. The sight lasted only a moment. As soon as the truck's headlights hit it fully, the animal reacted. It stood or shifted quickly and ran off the road. It disappeared into the forest with the young deer still in its mouth. There was no time to stop and take a photograph. This happened long before people automatically held up phones to record every unusual moment, and even if I had wanted to, the animal was visible for only a second or two. My immediate concern had also been controlling the truck and avoiding the herd. I could not safely reach for anything. Once the cougar disappeared, I looked at my girlfriend's uncle. He had seen it too. There was no need to convince him. We both knew what had been in the headlights. We talked about it immediately, repeating the same basic description. A full-sized cougar, a young deer in its mouth, sitting in the road after the herd crossed, then running back into the trees. Having another person in the cab became extremely important later. If I had been alone, I might have questioned myself more seriously. It was dark. I was tired. The event happened quickly. A driver can misidentify an animal under those conditions. But my girlfriend's uncle was looking through the same windshield and saw the same thing. We did not have time to influence one another before the animal disappeared. Our recognition happened at the same moment. The vehicles behind us had a different view. My girlfriend and her parents saw the deer and probably noticed me slowing down, but they did not get the same clear look at the animal in the road. By the time their headlights reached that part of the curve, the cougar had already vanished into the forest. When we eventually stopped or spoke with them, I told them what we had seen. They did not believe us. They suggested I had mistaken another animal for a cougar. Maybe it was a large dog. Perhaps it was a coyote dragging something across the road. It could have been a bobcat. They also suggested fatigue might have affected what I saw. We had been driving for hours in the middle of the night, and the appearance lasted only briefly. All of those explanations were reasonable questions. But my girlfriend's uncle supported my account. He had seen the same animal. He was certain it was a cougar. The disbelief became stronger after I looked into the animal's history in the state. According to the information I found, cougars had been considered extinct there for more than 100 years. At least there was no recognized breeding population. Officially, They were not supposed to be living in that area. There were occasional reports from people who claimed to have seen them, but those reports were usually treated as mistakes, rumors, or nonsense. Some people said the witnesses had seen bobcats. Others blamed large dogs, coyotes, or escaped exotic pets. Without photographs, tracks, hair, or a body, the reports were not considered credible. That placed our sighting in an uncomfortable category. I knew what I believed I saw. My girlfriend's uncle believed he saw the same thing. But the official status of the animal suggested we must have been wrong. I started going through alternative explanations. A bobcat was the most obvious. Bobcats can be larger than many people realize, and they are native to many areas where cougars are absent. At night, size can be difficult to judge. An animal close to the headlights may look much larger than it is. A bobcat carrying a small deer could appear impressive enough to be mistaken for a mountain lion. But the proportions did not match what I remembered. The animal looked too large. Its body was longer and more powerful. And again, I remembered a long tail. That is the detail that kept me from accepting the bobcat explanation. A dog was another possibility. Large dogs can have tan coats and may chase or kill deer. A mastiff, shepherd mix, or other powerful breed could be mistaken for a big cat during a brief sighting. If the animal was carrying part of a deer, its head and posture might have looked strange, but it did not move like a dog. Its body stayed low and fluid. The shoulders, back, and tail looked feline. My uncle described the same impression. It was not standing like a domestic animal that had wandered onto the road. It looked like a wild predator interrupted while carrying prey. A coyote seemed even less likely. Coyotes are much smaller than adult cougars. They may attack young deer, but the animal in the headlights looked too powerful. Its tail also did not have the bushy shape of a coyote's. The head and body were wrong. A wolf might have been large enough, but wolves were also not common there, and the animal did not have a wolf's shape. A black bear could carry prey, but this animal was tawny, long-tailed, and clearly cat-like. There was also the possibility of an escaped captive cougar. People sometimes keep exotic animals illegally. A mountain lion could have escaped from a private collection and survived in the forest without being part of a wild breeding population. That would explain how a real cougar could appear in a state where the species was officially considered extinct. It would also explain why sightings were rare. One escaped animal might travel widely and remain hidden, but an adult cougar capable of hunting deer would need to survive long enough to learn or maintain those skills. If it had been raised in captivity, that might be difficult. It was possible the animal had been captured young from another region and later escaped. There was no way for me to know. Another explanation was that the cougar had traveled naturally from a neighboring state. Large male cougars can cover enormous distances while searching for territory. Even if a state has no established breeding population, individual animals may occasionally pass through. Officially extinct does not always mean physically impossible. It may mean there is no confirmed resident population. A single wandering animal could enter the state, remain for a short time, and leave without ever being documented. That explanation became more convincing the more I thought about it. The remote area offered enough forest and deer to support a large predator temporarily. The herd we saw proved prey was abundant. The road was far from regular human activity. An animal could move through that landscape without being noticed often. Most people would be asleep at 3 or 4 in the morning. Even those driving through might see only a flash in the headlights and assume it was something else. Perhaps cougars had never completely disappeared. Maybe a very small number remained in isolated areas, too few to be officially recognized. Wildlife agencies usually require strong physical evidence. A sighting alone is not enough. especially when people commonly confuse other animals with cougars. Without confirmed tracks, photographs, or a carcass, an agency cannot declare that a breeding population exists. That standard makes sense scientifically. But it also means genuine sightings can remain unofficial for years. If every witness is dismissed because the animal is not supposed to exist, obtaining recognition becomes difficult. The logic can become circular. There are no cougars because there is no accepted evidence. Eyewitness reports are not accepted because there are no cougars. I am not saying every reported sighting is accurate. Many probably are bobcats, dogs, shadows, or exaggerations. People make mistakes. I may have made one too. But I know the conditions under which I saw the animal. The headlights were directly on it. It was not a distant silhouette at the edge of a field. It was sitting in the road in front of the truck. The young deer in its mouth provided a clear sense of scale. The animal was large enough to carry the deer easily. It had the build and movement of a cougar. My uncle had the same view. There is another detail that makes the sighting feel credible to me. The herd of deer had been running from the forest immediately before the cougar appeared. Their behavior made sense if a large predator had been pursuing them. Perhaps the cougar had attacked a young deer and caused the rest of the herd to flee across the road. The cougar then followed or stopped with its prey. When the truck appeared, it was caught in the headlights. This sequence was natural. It was not a random large cat sitting in the road without context. The prey, herd, and predator all fit together. A bobcat could potentially attack a very young fawn, but the animal we saw appeared to be carrying a deer substantial enough to make the cougar's size obvious. Memory can change, of course. 10 years is a long time. The young deer may have been smaller than I remember. The animal may have been farther away. The long tail could be a detail my mind added after I decided it was a cougar. Each time I tell the story, the image may become slightly clearer and more certain. Human memory does not preserve an event exactly like video. It rebuilds it. I have to acknowledge that. The event happened quickly and under stressful conditions. A herd of deer had just crossed in front of a moving truck. My adrenaline was high. My attention was divided between the animal and controlling the vehicle. The headlights created harsh shadows. Those circumstances can produce mistakes, but my uncle's independent sighting still matters. If memory changed later, it would need to have changed in both of us in the same direction. Perhaps we influenced each other immediately after the event. One of us said cougar, and the other agreed. Once the label existed, our memories adapted to it. That is possible. Maybe he saw only a large tan animal, and my certainty shaped his interpretation. Or perhaps he recognized it first and influenced me. I do not remember who used the word first. Even so, neither of us hesitated. There was no long debate inside the cab. We both reacted as though we had seen something unmistakable. I have sometimes wondered whether the family members in the vehicle behind us saw more than they admitted. Their angle was worse, and the cougar left before they reached the exact place, but they may have caught part of the movement. Perhaps they just missed it because accepting a cougar sighting seemed impossible. People often trust prior knowledge over a brief observation. If they believed cougars did not exist in the state, then whatever crossed the road had to be something else. That response is understandable. Official information carries more weight than a tired driver's story. The area's later reports interest me. Even today, people occasionally claim to see cougars in that region. Those sightings are often described as non-credible. Some witnesses report large tan cats, long tails, or screams in the night. Most accounts have no photographs or physical evidence. Critics point out that trail cameras cover large areas and rarely capture confirmed cougars. Hunters, farmers, and wildlife workers spend time outdoors without finding clear signs. If a resident population existed, there should be tracks, scat, kills, and road deaths. That argument is strong. Large predators leave evidence. A breeding group could not remain invisible forever, but a few wandering individuals would be much harder to document. One cougar crossing a state might avoid cameras and people for most of its journey. It could be seen briefly by several witnesses and never establish a permanent territory. That would produce exactly the pattern described in the area. Occasional sightings without enough evidence to confirm a population. I am not qualified to determine whether that is what happened. I only know that one night, in a remote part of the state, 2 of us saw a large cat carrying a deer. I do not need the state to contain a hidden breeding population for our sighting to be real. There only needed to be one animal on that road. The experience did not feel supernatural. There was nothing ghostly about the cougar. It behaved like a real predator. It had weight. It carried physical prey. It reacted to the headlights and fled into the forest. The mystery comes from the official claim that such an animal should not have been there. In some ways, that is more unsettling than seeing a ghost. A ghost can be dismissed as fear, sleep, or imagination. This animal appeared in the road in front of 2 awake witnesses. If it was a cougar, then the wilderness around us contained something large enough to hunt deer that most people believed had vanished from the state a century earlier. That changed the way I thought about remote places. Humans like to believe that the natural world has been completely mapped and classified. We know which animals live in each region. We track populations. We create range maps and declare species present, threatened, absent, or extinct. Those systems are necessary, but the animals do not read the maps. A predator can cross a border without becoming officially recognized. A species declared gone can occasionally reappear. Remote forests are larger and quieter than they seem from a highway. An animal may live or travel there for years while showing itself to humans only for seconds. I think about how close we came to missing it. If the deer had crossed a minute earlier, the cougar would have carried its prey into the trees before we arrived. If we had driven slightly faster, we might have hit one of the deer and never noticed the predator behind them. If the cougar had left the road a second sooner, only my uncle or I might have caught a glimpse. If we had taken another route, the sighting would never have happened. That brief overlap between our journey and the animal's hunt produced a memory that has lasted a decade. I also think about the deer herd. Their sudden appearance was dangerous, but it gave us a warning. The animals forced me to slow down before the cougar became visible. Without them, I might have entered the curve at full speed and found the cat directly in front of the truck. Perhaps it would still have escaped. Maybe I would have struck it. A collision could have provided the physical evidence no one would have been able to dismiss, but I am glad that did not happen. The cougar was doing what predators do. It had caught prey and was trying to survive. It did not threaten us. It fled the moment it encountered the truck. I have no desire to prove the sighting through the animal's death. I wish we had obtained a photograph, but the circumstances made that impossible. The image exists only in the memories of the 2 people in the cab. That means the story will always remain debatable. Someone can hear it and say we saw a bobcat. Another person can blame a dog, coyote, exhaustion, or poor visibility. They may be right. I cannot place the animal in front of them and prove otherwise. I have learned not to argue too aggressively. I know how unbelievable the claim sounds when the species was officially absent for more than a century. But disbelief does not change what I remember. The road clearing after the herd, the cougar sitting in the headlights, the young deer hanging from its mouth, the long body and tail. Then the sudden movement as it disappeared into the forest. My uncle remembers it too. That is enough for me to take the sighting seriously, even if it is not enough for scientific confirmation. I would be interested to return to that area with proper equipment. Trail cameras could be placed along game paths. Tracks near water or deer kills could be examined. Hair and scat could be tested. A single clear image would change the conversation completely. But 10 years have passed. Even if the animal was real, it may have traveled hundreds of miles away or died long ago. The exact location may also be difficult to identify now. At 3 in the morning on an unfamiliar road, one forested curve looks much like another. The opportunity to investigate properly disappeared almost as quickly as the cougar did. What remains is uncertainty. Maybe I saw an ordinary animal under unusual conditions. Maybe the darkness and adrenaline turned a bobcat into something much larger. Perhaps my uncle and I reinforced each other's mistake. Those explanations are possible, and I cannot honestly rule them out. But I also cannot ignore the simplest interpretation of what was directly in front of us. A cougar had chased or scattered a herd of deer. It caught one of the younger animals. Then it stopped in the road for 1 second before our headlights forced it back into the forest. The fact that cougars were considered extinct in the state does not make that impossible. It only makes the sighting rare. I still think about the people who continue reporting large cats in the same general area. Perhaps they are all mistaken. Maybe local stories cause witnesses to label every large bobcat as a mountain lion. Once a legend exists, people begin looking for evidence that supports it. But maybe some of them saw exactly what we saw. They caught one clear moment that lasted too briefly to document. Then they told others and were dismissed because the animal was not officially there. I understand that feeling. I was not searching for a cougar. I had no reason to invent one. I was exhausted, driving a moving truck through an isolated area and trying not to hit a herd of deer. The cat was simply there when the road cleared. It looked solid, healthy, and fully adult. It was not a ghost of an extinct population. It was alive enough to hunt, strong enough to carry a young deer, and fast enough to vanish into the trees before the next vehicle reached the curve. Perhaps one day clear evidence will confirm that cougars occasionally pass through that part of the state. If that happens, our story will sound less impossible. Until then, it remains another non-credible sighting from the middle of nowhere. But when I remember that night, I do not see a vague shape in the darkness. I see the road illuminated by the rental truck's headlights. I see the last deer disappear into the trees. Then I see a full-sized cougar sitting alone on the pavement with its prey in its mouth, in a state where everyone insisted it had been gone for more than 100 years.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
I was around 12 or 13 years old when my older brother and I had one of the strangest nights I can remember in our house. My brother was about 2 years older than me, and we shared the same bedroom. At night, I always slept with our bedroom door closed. I preferred it that way because the hallway outside was dark, and I did not like being able to see into it while trying to sleep. A closed door made the bedroom feel separate from the rest of the house. It felt safer. That night, both of us went to bed normally. Nothing unusual had happened earlier. There had been no argument, storm, power outage, or frightening conversation before we fell asleep. At around 3 in the morning, I woke suddenly. I know 3 in the morning sounds like the most obvious time for a creepy story, but that is roughly when it happened. I had been sleeping soundly when I heard our bedroom door open. It did not only move slightly. The door opened enough that I could see into the hallway. I looked toward it, expecting someone to be standing there. Maybe one of my parents had come to check on us. Perhaps someone needed to use the bathroom or wanted to wake my brother. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. I remained in bed, staring through the open doorway. I was exhausted and did not want to get up, just to close it. At that age, I was still afraid of the dark in certain situations, even if I would not have wanted to admit it. The hallway was one of those situations. When the bedroom door was open at night, I always imagined something standing just outside the room where the darkness was deepest. So instead of getting up, I pulled the covers higher and hid beneath them. I did not completely cover my face. I left a small opening so I could continue watching the doorway. It was not logical. If there really had been something dangerous in the hall, a blanket would not have protected me. But as a child, being covered made me feel less visible. I watched the open door for several minutes. Nothing appeared. The hallway remained still. I began telling myself the door had not latched properly. Maybe air pressure somewhere in the house had pushed it open. A heating system turning on, or another door closing, could create enough pressure to move a loose door. That was a reasonable explanation. I was beginning to relax when I heard footsteps. They came from somewhere outside the bedroom. The door was still open, so the sound entered clearly. The footsteps moved along the hallway, close enough that I could tell they were not coming from a television or from outside the house. Someone seemed to be walking just beyond the doorway. I froze under the covers. I listened for one of my parents to speak. No one did. The footsteps continued for a moment, and then stopped. I remained still, waiting for someone to appear in the opening. Nothing entered. After a few seconds, I decided I needed to check. The uncertainty was worse than getting out of bed. I pushed the blanket away and stood up. The hallway looked empty from where I was, but I stepped closer to the door and looked in both directions. There was no one on either side. I could see toward the other rooms and the bathroom. No person was walking away. No shadow moved around a corner. The hall was silent. I did not go farther. I returned to bed and covered myself again. At that point, I was no longer simply tired. I was watching the doorway for demons, ghosts, intruders, or anything else my frightened mind could imagine. My brother had awakened too. I do not know whether the door or footsteps woke him, but by then, both of us were aware that something strange was happening. That mattered, because I was not alone with the experience. He could hear the sounds too. We remained in our separate beds looking toward the open door. Neither of us wanted to leave the room. For some reason, I eventually decided the best option was to turn away from the doorway. Maybe I thought that if I stopped watching, nothing would happen. Perhaps I was exhausted and wanted to force myself back to sleep. My brother turned away in his bed too. We both placed our backs toward the open door. The moment we stopped watching, the bedroom door slammed shut. The sound was violent and sudden. The door did not drift closed slowly. It struck the frame hard enough to make both of us jump. At almost the same moment, the fan switched to its highest setting. The sudden rush of air filled the room. Whatever quiet remained was replaced by the noise of the fan running at full speed. I was terrified. The combination made it seem as though something had waited until we turned away. While we watched the doorway, nothing entered. As soon as both of us stopped looking, the door slammed and the fan came on. I turned back immediately. The bedroom door was fully closed. There was no one inside the room with us. My brother was still in his bed. I was in mine. No person stood near the door or fan controls. I tried to think of an electrical explanation. Maybe the fan had already been set to high and power had briefly gone out. If electricity returned, it might have restarted at that speed. But I did not remember the lights flickering. No other device seemed affected. The door slamming could have been caused by the fan creating a sudden change in air pressure. That would make sense if the fan turned on first. The moving air might pull the door closed. But in the moment, both events seemed to happen together. I barely had time to process it before another sound came from inside the room. The closet door slammed shut. I had not even been thinking about the closet. I do not remember whether it had been opened fully or only slightly, but it suddenly closed with enough force that both of us heard it clearly. Now, two doors had slammed. The bedroom door. Then, the closet. The fan continued running on high. I remember thinking that whatever was happening had moved into the room. The footsteps had been outside. Then the bedroom door slammed. Then something affected the closet. It felt as though a presence had passed from the hallway into our bedroom before trapping us inside. Just when I thought the activity might be over, the bedroom door began to open again. This time, it moved slowly. That was more frightening than the slam. A door can slam because of air pressure. A loose hinge or draft can move it quickly. But watching it open slowly created the impression that someone had a hand on it. The door eased away from the frame. The dark hallway appeared again through the widening gap. Neither my brother nor I moved. We watched the opening grow. No hand appeared around the edge. No face looked inside. There was no visible person behind it. The door continued opening on its own. Then we heard footsteps running through the hallway. These were faster than the earlier steps. Something sounded as though it were moving quickly from one end of the hall to the other. The footsteps passed the open bedroom door, but no one was there. I could hear the movement. I could see the hallway. Nothing visible crossed the doorway. That was the moment when the ordinary explanations became harder to hold on to. If one of my parents had been walking around, we should have seen them. If an animal had been running, we should have seen it pass. The doorway was open and both of us were watching. The footsteps moved through the hall without any body attached to them. I do not remember how long the activity continued. It may have happened only a few more times, or perhaps we remained awake for hours waiting for it to start again. Fear makes time difficult to judge. I remember the bedroom door being open. I remember the fan running. I remember my brother being awake, which prevented me from convincing myself that it was only a dream. We did not investigate further. Neither of us wanted to step into the hallway. We stayed in the bedroom until morning. The house became quiet again eventually. The doors stopped moving. The footsteps disappeared. Nothing else entered the room. When daylight finally arrived, the hallway looked ordinary. The bedroom door was only a door again. The closet remained closed. The fan could be switched off normally. There were no footprints or signs that someone had been running through the hall. Nothing had been stolen or disturbed. In the morning, we told our parents what had happened. We described the bedroom door opening by itself. We told them about the footsteps outside the room and how I had checked both directions, but found no one. We explained that the door slammed after we turned away, the fan switched to high, and the closet door slammed too. We told them the bedroom door slowly opened again and that we heard something running through the hallway even though the hall was visibly empty. They did not believe us. They thought we had been hallucinating, dreaming, or frightening each other. That was the expected reaction. Two tired children waking around 3 in the morning and telling a story about invisible footsteps and moving doors sounds like a shared nightmare. My parents probably believed one of us had heard an ordinary noise and panicked. The fear then spread to the other. Once both of us were awake and nervous, every creak, draft, and mechanical sound became part of the same event. That explanation is possible. The first door opening could have been caused by a bad latch. If the door was not fully closed, pressure changes in the house could move it. The footsteps may have come from pipes, wood settling, or one of our parents moving in another room. Sound can travel strangely through houses, especially at night when everything is quiet. Something downstairs might have sounded as though it were directly outside our door. The bedroom door slamming could have been caused by a draft. If a window was open somewhere, air might have moved through the hallway and pulled the door shut. The fan switching on could have increased that airflow. The closet door might also have moved because of the same pressure change. Then, the bedroom door could have opened again as the pressure shifted. It is possible that several normal mechanical events happened close together. A loose door, a fan malfunction, air moving through the room, old floorboards making noises. Our fear connected everything into one supernatural sequence. The fan is one of the details I still have difficulty explaining. Someone could have left it switched to high, and maybe it had not been running because of a loose connection. A temporary electrical issue might have caused it to start. If the fan had a pull chain, vibration could have affected the setting. I do not remember the exact type of control now. It happened years ago, and small details about the room have faded. But at the time, it felt as though the fan activated by itself. No one was near it. The closet door is also explainable through airflow. Closet doors are often light. If the fan suddenly came on, the moving air could have pushed or pulled it shut. The sequence may have felt intentional, only because we were frightened. The bedroom door slams. The fan starts. The closet closes. Then the bedroom door reopens. There may have been no invisible person controlling anything. Air was simply moving through a room with loose doors. The footsteps are more difficult because both of us heard them. Still, shared hearing does not prove a paranormal cause. There was a real sound. We may only have misunderstood its source. An animal could have been in the hallway. A cat or dog running across a hard floor can sound much larger than it is. If it passed close to the wall rather than directly across the doorway, we might not have seen it. It could have moved down the stairs or into another room before we looked. I do not remember whether our family had pets at that time, so I cannot use that as a definite explanation. One of my parents could also have walked to the bathroom, heard us moving, and returned to bed without speaking. But they denied knowing anything about the event. Perhaps they had been half asleep and did not remember. The running footsteps with no visible person may have been sound traveling from another part of the house. Someone could have been moving upstairs or downstairs outside our direct line of sight. The hall acted like a tunnel, making the sound seem closer. That is reasonable. Yet the footsteps seemed to pass directly in front of our open doorway. Both my brother and I were watching. Nothing crossed. That remains the detail that makes the experience feel paranormal to me. I have considered sleep paralysis or a waking hallucination. People can wake during the night and see or hear things that are not physically present. The real bedroom remains visible while dream imagery continues. Doors can appear to open. Figures may stand in hallways. Sounds may seem completely real. But both my brother and I were awake. We spoke and reacted to the same events. I got out of bed and checked the hall. My brother watched the door with me. It seems unlikely that we experienced identical hallucinations at the same time. One of us could have influenced the other. If I said I heard footsteps, my brother may have listened and interpreted normal house sounds the same way. When the door moved, we both reacted because it physically moved. The shared parts could have been real, while our interpretation was shaped by fear. That is probably the strongest natural explanation. Something caused the door and closet to move. Something caused the fan to start. Something created noises in the hall. None of those things were supernatural by themselves. Our fear made them feel connected and intentional. Still, it seemed as though the activity responded to us. The first door opened and remained that way while I watched. Footsteps began after several minutes. When I checked the hallway, the noise stopped. After my brother and I turned our backs, the door immediately slammed. Then the fan and closet reacted. When we looked again, the door slowly opened. The footsteps returned at a run. The timing felt aware. It was as if something wanted our attention. When we watched, it waited. When we looked away, it acted. That sense of intelligence is what frightened me more than the noises themselves. I do not know why we turned away from the doorway. Maybe it was simply exhaustion. Perhaps we both hoped ignoring the activity would make it stop. Instead, turning away seemed to trigger the strongest part of the night. I sometimes wonder whether the thing, if there was a thing, wanted us to understand that it could enter the room whenever it chose. The open door first made us watch the hall. The footsteps made us investigate. Then, once we stopped watching, the door slammed as though something had crossed the threshold. The closet door slamming suggested it had moved deeper into the room. The slow reopening of the bedroom door felt like it was leaving again. The running footsteps in the hall may have been it moving away. That is only an interpretation. I never saw a figure. There was no voice. Nothing touched us. No object floated or disappeared. The event was entirely made of movement and sound. That leaves plenty of room for normal causes. But it also prevented us from identifying anything clearly. If a shadow had crossed the hall, we might have discovered it was a person or animal. If we had seen a hand on the door, we could have understood what moved it. Instead, every action happened without a visible source. After that night, I changed how I closed the bedroom door. I began putting a shoe under it. The shoe acted like a simple doorstop. Even if the latch failed or the air pressure changed, the door should not be able to open easily. I also locked it. That may have been unnecessary, but it helped me sleep. If the door remained closed, I did not have to watch the hallway. The lock gave me some control over a situation that had felt completely outside my control. I do not remember whether the door ever moved again with the shoe beneath it. I do not recall another night where the fan, closet, and hallway all reacted in the same way. The event remained isolated. That supports the possibility that it was a rare combination of drafts, house sounds, and two tired children. If something truly haunted the room, I might expect repeated activity. On the other hand, one experience can be enough. Whatever happened may not have been attached to the room permanently. It may have passed through once. Perhaps the house only created the right conditions for strange sounds that night and never repeated them in exactly the same order. I do not strongly claim there were demons in the house. That was how my younger mind interpreted it. The open doorway represented something entering. The footsteps represented something invisible moving around. The slamming doors felt aggressive. But there is no proof that a demon, ghost, or spirit was involved. The word demon was simply the easiest label for something frightening that I could not see. My brother's presence remains important. If I had been alone, I would probably accept that I dreamed or hallucinated most of the night. I had been sleeping soundly and woke around 3. That is exactly when sleep-related confusion can happen. But my brother was awake too. He heard the sounds and watched the door. Whatever the cause, the experience was not entirely inside my mind. At minimum, physical things happened in the room. The door moved. The fan started. The closet slammed. There were noises in the hallway. The disagreement is only about why. Maybe my parents were correct. We were tired and frightened. A loose latch opened the door. Air currents moved it again. The fan and closet reacted mechanically. Ordinary house noises became footsteps. Two brothers spent the rest of the night reinforcing each other's fear. That explanation is practical. It may be completely true, but I still remember the exact moment when both of us turned away from the open door. We had watched it for several minutes. Nothing visible entered. Then, with our backs facing the hallway, the bedroom door slammed shut hard enough to make us jump. The fan roared to life. The closet door slammed. And when the bedroom door slowly opened again, something ran through the hallway so loudly that both of us could follow its movement, even though there was no one there. By morning, the house was normal. Our parents called it a hallucination. After that, I kept the door locked and wedged a shoe beneath it every night. Maybe I was only protecting myself from a faulty latch and a draft, but I never again wanted to give whatever had been walking through that hallway an easy way into our room. When I was a teenager, I had two experiences in our house that I still think may have been paranormal. At the time, I was in high school and usually stayed awake later than my parents. They would often go to bed before me, which meant I had more freedom to stay downstairs watching television, using the computer, or doing whatever else I wanted without being disturbed. On a normal weekday, I would go to bed sometime between 10:30 and midnight. The house was usually completely quiet by then. My parents slept upstairs with their bedroom door closed. All of our animals normally slept in their room with them, so once everyone had settled down, I was usually the only one still moving around the house. I have to admit that I was still uncomfortable with darkness. I was old enough to know there was probably nothing waiting in a dark room, but we had experienced enough strange things in the house that I never felt completely relaxed after the lights went out. Going upstairs at night became a routine. I would stand near the downstairs light switch, prepare myself, turn the light off, and then move quickly up the stairs. Most of the time, I ran. I knew it looked childish, but I could not help it. The moment the downstairs area became dark, I felt exposed. It seemed as though something could step out behind me before I reached the top. I always felt safer once I was inside my bedroom. One night, I followed the same routine. My parents were already asleep. The animals were with them. I switched off the downstairs light and ran upstairs to my room. Nothing happened while I was climbing the stairs. I entered my bedroom, got into bed, and tried to fall asleep. For some reason, I could not relax. The house felt too quiet. I lay there, listening, hoping I would become tired enough to stop paying attention to every small sound. Then, I heard something downstairs. It sounded like heavy footsteps, not ordinary walking. These were stomps. Each step landed with enough force that I could hear it clearly from my bedroom. The sound began downstairs and moved toward the staircase. I remained in bed and listened. The stomping reached the bottom step. Then it began climbing. One heavy step after another moved upward through the house. At first, I thought one of our animals must be wandering around. A cat running on stairs can sound much heavier than it really is, especially at night when the rest of the house is silent. A dog can also make a strong thumping sound while climbing. I tried to accept that explanation. The footsteps continued upward. Then, before they reached my room, they stopped. For a moment, the hallway was quiet. The sound turned around and began stomping back down the stairs. It reached the lower floor. Then, it came back up. The same pattern repeated. Something would stomp from downstairs to upstairs, turn around, go back down, and then climb again. I stayed in bed trying to convince myself that one of the pets was restless. Maybe one of the cats had not gone into my parents' room that night. Cats sometimes become active for no reason and run through a house in the middle of the night. One could have been racing up and down the stairs. Then I remembered that all of the animals had gone into my parents' room. Their door was always closed at night. The pets could not have been on the staircase unless one had somehow been left outside the room. That was possible. Maybe a cat had hidden under furniture and missed bedtime. I wanted that to be the answer badly enough that I decided to check. Getting out of bed required more courage than I would like to admit. The stomping had stopped downstairs again, and I had no idea whether it was about to begin climbing. I moved toward my bedroom door and reached for the hallway light switch. I turned it on. The upstairs hallway immediately became visible. The staircase was empty. I looked toward the bathroom and the other rooms. Nothing moved. I stepped far enough into the hallway to look downstairs. There was no animal on the steps. No person stood at the bottom. I did not see a shadow moving through the lower floor. The moment I switched on the light, the stomping had stopped. That should have reassured me. If it was an animal, perhaps the light startled it and caused it to hide. I checked as much as I could without going all the way downstairs. I still saw nothing. The house looked completely normal. I returned to my room. I turned off the hallway light and left my bedroom door partially closed. I did not shut it completely because part of me wanted to hear if my parents woke up or if an animal came through the hall. At the same time, I did not want the door wide open. The darkness outside my room felt too exposed. For a few seconds, everything remained silent. Then, the stomping began again. It came from downstairs, just as before. The sound moved toward the staircase and started climbing. This time, I listened more carefully. The steps did not sound like a cat. They were too slow and heavy. Each impact seemed deliberate. The stomping reached the upstairs hallway and stopped near the bathroom. Then it turned around and went back down. A short time later, it began climbing again. Each time it returned, it seemed to come slightly closer to my bedroom. The first time, it stopped near the top of the stairs. The next time, it reached the bathroom. Then it seemed to continue farther into the hallway. I could not see anything through the small opening in my door. I only heard the steps approaching and retreating. It felt as though whatever was making the noise was testing how close it could get. I remained frozen in bed. I wanted to wake my parents, but doing that meant leaving the room and walking into the hallway. I also felt embarrassed. If I opened their door and told them something was stomping on the stairs, they would probably switch on the lights, find nothing, and tell me it was one of the animals. I kept trying to explain it that way myself. Maybe a pet had somehow gotten out. Maybe sound from inside my parents' room was traveling strangely through the floor. One of the animals could have been moving around near their door, and the house made it sound as though the noise was on the stairs. But the footsteps had direction. I could hear them begin below me, climb one step at a time, reach the hallway, and then descend again. The movement was too clear. The stomping came back once more. This time it seemed closer than before. I shut my bedroom door completely. I turned on the light. Then I switched on the television. The sound and brightness helped. The room no longer felt isolated from the rest of the house. I kept the volume high enough that I would not hear every creak, but low enough that I would still notice if someone knocked on my door. The stomping stopped again. I lay in bed staring at the television, trying to calm down. Eventually, the normal voices and images on the screen made me feel safer. I must have fallen asleep with the light and television still on. A friend of mine sometimes came to our house very early in the morning. He did not live in our town. He lived in a city about 10 minutes away, and he did not trust the area enough to wait outside alone before school. His mother had to leave early for work, so she would sometimes drop him off around 4 in the morning. He would tell people he was staying with a relative near my house, but in reality, he would simply come inside and sleep in my room until it was time to get ready. This arrangement happened often enough that he knew how to enter quietly. Usually, he opened my bedroom door, found a place on the floor, and passed out without saying much. That morning, when he arrived, he was confused. I was asleep with the bedroom light and television on, and the door was shut. That was not how he normally found me. I woke enough to realize he was there. He asked what was going on. I told him about the stomping. I explained that something had spent part of the night moving up and down the stairs, stopping closer to my room each time. I told him I had checked the hallway and found nothing. I do not remember exactly how he reacted. He may have laughed nervously or suggested it was an animal, but I was grateful he was there. Having another person in the room made the house feel safer. Nothing else happened that morning. The stomping did not begin again while he was awake. My parents did not mention hearing anything. The animals were still in their room. That should have been enough to convince me that I had misheard normal house noises. Maybe I had been tired. Perhaps the heating system or pipes created a repeating pattern that sounded like footsteps. Old houses can produce surprisingly heavy knocks as wood expands and contracts. Sound also travels through walls and stairwells in strange ways. A noise from another room might seem to move even when its source remains still. I knew all of that. But I had listened to the footsteps for too long to dismiss them completely. They had climbed, they had turned around, they had descended. Then they had returned and moved closer. The second experience happened on another night when I had two friends staying with me. One was the friend who sometimes arrived around 4 in the morning. The other was a friend who had problems at home. He lived with his mother, who struggled with drinking, and he did not always get along with his father. Because of that, he spent a lot of time at our house. My family had more or less taken him in when he needed somewhere to stay. When he slept over, he usually lay on the floor near the foot of my bed. My other friend would take another section of floor beside the bed. It was not especially comfortable, but we were teenagers and did not care much. Having both of them around also made the house feel less frightening at night. On the night of the second incident, one of my friends was downstairs with me. I was using my computer and trying to get a Sega Saturn emulator working. I wanted to play the Saturn version of Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, because it had additional content that was not in the version I already knew. The emulator refused to work properly. I spent a long time changing settings, opening files, restarting the program, and trying anything I could think of. My friend sat nearby watching television or playing another game. It was late, and eventually he decided he was ready to sleep. He told me he was going upstairs. I did not want to admit that I disliked being left alone downstairs in the dark. Instead, I told him to wait for me. I said I was almost finished and would go upstairs with him. He had no idea that shutting down the computer and crossing the dark lower floor alone made me nervous. I acted as though I simply wanted another minute to finish what I was doing. He remained downstairs while I began closing the emulator and shutting down the computer. That was when we heard the scream. It came through the vent. The sound was sudden and close. It did not resemble the normal noises of air moving through the heating system. It sounded like a person or something trying to sound like one. A sharp scream traveled through the vent beside us. Both of us stopped moving. We looked directly at each other. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then one of us asked, "Did you hear that?" The other immediately said yes. That shared reaction removed the easiest explanation. I had not imagined it. My friend heard the same thing at the same moment. We did not stay downstairs to investigate. We ran upstairs. Whatever embarrassment I had about being afraid of the dark disappeared. My friend was frightened too, and neither of us wanted to remain near the vent. We reached my bedroom and joined the other friend or waited there together. I do not remember waking my parents. At that point, we may have tried to tell ourselves the sound came from the house. Air vents can carry noises from distant rooms. A sound made upstairs might travel through the ductwork and emerge downstairs, making it seem as though it came from inside the wall. One of my parents could have coughed, cried out in a dream, or made another sound while sleeping. An animal in their room might have yowled or barked. The vent could have distorted the noise until it sounded like a scream. That is possible. Metal ducts can change the pitch and direction of a sound. Something happening outside might also have entered through part of the ventilation system. Cats, foxes, and other animals sometimes make calls that sound disturbingly human. A cat fighting outside can produce a scream that seems impossible for an animal. If the sound traveled through the vent, it would have felt as though it came from inside the house. But the timing and location affected me. I was downstairs late at night again. I was preparing to turn off the computer and lights. My friend had nearly left me alone. Then something screamed from the vent. It felt as though the house had reacted to our decision to go upstairs. The scream also reminded me of the stomping. Both events involved something moving or sounding through parts of the house without ever revealing itself. The footsteps traveled between floors. The scream came through the system connecting the rooms. In both cases, the sound stopped when we reacted. I never saw a figure during either incident. Nothing stood on the staircase when I switched on the light. No face appeared inside the vent. There were only sounds. That makes normal explanations more likely. Houses carry noise. Wood settles. Pipes knock. Animals move inside walls or beneath floors. Heating systems expand and contract. A teenager already afraid of the dark can turn those noises into footsteps and screams. But the stomping was unlike random settling. It repeated the same path. The vent scream was heard by two people who both understood it as something unusual. That is why I still consider the incidents possibly paranormal. I have wondered whether the footsteps were connected to something in the ventilation system. A large animal in the walls or attic might have moved between levels. Raccoons can sound much heavier than expected. If one traveled through a crawl space near the staircase, the noise might appear to climb and descend. An animal could also make a loud cry inside or near a vent on the second night. That would provide one explanation for both events. But we never found evidence of a large animal inside the house. There were no damaged vents, droppings, scratches, or repeated noises that clearly suggested an infestation. The pets did not react strongly enough to indicate another animal was nearby. My parents also never mentioned hearing anything inside the walls. Maybe the footsteps were caused by one of our own animals after all. A cat could have slipped out when my parents closed their door. When I turned on the hallway light, it may have hidden downstairs or entered another room. Once the light went off, it resumed running. By morning, it could have returned to my parents' room when the door opened. That explanation is simple. The problem is the weight of the steps. I remember stomping, not the quick, light movement of paws. It sounded like 2 feet rather than 4. It climbed at the pace of a person. Still, fear can make every noise seem heavier. The closed bedroom door also may not have been as secure as I remember. One of the pets could have pushed through or been outside all along. The scream from the vent has similar uncertainty. It may have been a parent, animal, television, or sound from outside. My friend and I confirmed only that we heard it, not that it was supernatural. Two witnesses can misidentify the same real noise. We were both tired. The house was quiet. A sudden sound became much more frightening than it would have during the day. Perhaps one of us asked, "Was that a scream?" and influenced the other. Memory may have changed the exact wording over time. But I remember us looking at each other before either person offered an explanation. We both knew the sound was wrong. The experiences never gave me enough evidence to decide what was happening. I did not see something impossible. No object floated. No person disappeared. Nothing touched me. I heard footsteps where no one should have been walking, and later my friend and I heard a scream come through a vent. That is all I can honestly claim. Yet sound can be more frightening than sight. When you see something, you can study it. You can turn on a light and identify a coat, shadow, or animal. With sound, the source can remain hidden. You know something happened, but you cannot prove where it came from. During the stomping, I imagined something climbing the stairs in the dark. Each time it turned around, I wondered why. Was it unable to reach my room? Was it waiting for me to open the door? Was it repeating the route simply to make sure I heard it? When it began stopping closer to the bathroom and then closer to my room, it felt aware of where I was. The most disturbing thought was that it had seen me run upstairs after turning off the light. Maybe it followed. Perhaps it was moving up and down because it knew I was listening. I do not strongly believe that now. The logical explanations are easier to accept. But that was how it felt at the time. The scream created the same sense of awareness. My friend was about to go upstairs. I asked him to wait because I did not want to be alone. Then, as I shut down the computer, something screamed from the vent. It was as if the house had been listening to our conversation. Again, that interpretation may come entirely from fear. The sound could have happened at any moment. The fact that it occurred then was coincidence. I have never discovered a clear history of the house that explains either event. I do not know of anyone dying on the staircase or inside the walls. I do not want to invent a tragedy just to give the story a supernatural cause. Maybe the building was simply noisy. Maybe teenage fear connected unrelated sounds into a pattern. That is possible, but both incidents remain clear in my memory. I remember lying in bed while the stomping traveled up the staircase. I remember switching on the hallway light and finding every step empty. I remember turning the light off and hearing the noise begin again. I remember it stopping near the bathroom before returning downstairs. Each time, it came closer. Then I shut the door, turned on the light and television, and eventually fell asleep. Around 4 in the morning, my friend opened the door and found me sleeping that way. I remember telling him what had happened and feeling safer because someone else was finally in the room. On the other night, I remember fighting with the emulator while my friend waited downstairs. I remember pretending I only needed another minute because I did not want to admit the dark frightened me. Then a scream came through the vent. We stared at each other. Did you hear that? We both had. Then we ran. Maybe every part of it has a normal explanation. An animal on the stairs. Metal contracting inside the house. A sound traveling through the vents. Tired teenagers becoming frightened by noises they could not identify. I hope that is all it was. But when I think back to that house, I do not remember the darkness as empty. I remember something heavy climbing from the lower floor, turning near the bathroom, and repeating the journey until it was almost outside my bedroom. And I remember that on another night, when I was finally not alone downstairs, something hidden inside the house screamed through the vent strongly enough to send both of us running upstairs.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.